Got it.
Hey everybody, it's Uncle Grumpy and welcome to Grumpy Tonight. As you can see, I'm here tonight with Dr. Lawrence Pasternack. How you doing, Lawrence?
I'm all right as usual. I guess I say I'm kind of tired. I actually closed my eyes for a little bit before the show. It's been a long day.
One of these days, I'm hoping I'm going to ask you, how are you, Lawrence? And you're going to be like, oh man, I'm just having such a great day. Just wait till I tell you what happened. I just want to see you all excited. And then I'll be taken aback for sure. For sure.
Well, I'll
We'll all
tell
be
you what, I'm
shocked.
looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to a day like that as well.
I bet you are. All right. Well, all we're going to do tonight, two things. First off, any of you joining us, if you would like to join us on the camera, say so. I'll send you the link and we'll get you in here with us.
All we're going to do tonight, two things.
First, sorry about that. Trying to get this going. All right. So I can see who's in here. Looks like we got about 8 people joining us so far. Again, if one of you guys or all of you want to join in and talk with us about the petitions or about today's meeting, that's what we're going to be talking about. So just let us know. We'll share the link. Let me save the link. Maybe I'll just put it in the comments if someone says they want to join.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Lawrence. You were going to say?
I was just going to say, I thought that it was a really productive event today at the bunker. We had a ballpark of about 30 people show up, ate a lot of hot dogs. Bison and Rose were generous enough to provide the Nathan's hot dogs, which were delicious. And, just out of the feedback that we were getting in the Q&As and so on, I wrote some notes down. I think I have 4 or 5 different comments that I wrote down that I'll talk to Jed about, and we'll see what we can do in terms of tweaking the petition in accordance with those thoughts. Everybody's individual experience, where they're suffering some of the consequences of cannabis prohibition or have some, unique perspective, bring these things to us, and we're putting in everything we can to make sure that everybody has all the rights protected. We added something new yesterday, Jed and I, in light of an issue somebody was having with their child who uses cannabis for epilepsy and trying to get that medication for them while at school.
Well, first off, you're right that those Nathan hot dogs were delicious. So thank you to Bison and Rose for bringing the dogs and buns. Appreciate it. And Deb Holden for bringing chips, and anybody else who brought anything. I appreciate it. It was really good. We got to eat a little food before we started our meeting, so we didn't go live till about 3, but we still ended up with about 20 people watching us for a little over an hour and a half while we discussed some of this. Now, we haven't gotten into the details so much in today's meeting, and I talked about that at the end of the meeting, about I'm looking forward to when we get into arguing over each line. And I think that's what we have to start doing, is people need to start saying what they think of each individual part, what they would tweak, if anything, what they would add. One thing that came up today that maybe we could talk about now was, I think it was Stephen Ross had a question that related to where some of the money was going to go in helping people get their lives back together. You remember that question? So
Yes.
And remind me, what is in there that helps with that? I know a little, you've got, I want to say 3%, but once you fill me in and remind us what that has in there now.
There's about 6 or 7 different line items in terms of where the money goes. And they're written in the following way. Whatever the total dollars are that get into the cannabis fund from the excise taxes and so on. So let's say we get $100 million in, then 1.5% of that $100 million will go to one place, and 3% of that $100 million will go to another place. And then eventually whatever is left over goes into the general fund, with 75% of that earmarked for education. So the particular line items that are 1.5 and 3%, I don't know if I remember them all at the top of my head, but they include such things as providing funding to law enforcement to educate them about cannabis, to make sure that they're properly educated about cannabis laws pertaining to businesses and patients. So basically, law enforcement doesn't make mistakes out of their years of experience where cannabis has been prohibited, make mistakes and mistreat somebody. So some of the money has to do with retraining law enforcement. Some of the money has to do with developing new techniques and new skill sets in terms of mental health crisis intervention.
Okay, all right, hold on a second. Hold on.
Yes.
Hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me ask. I want to delve into this just a little bit. Some of the things you're talking about, they sound similar to some of what we heard last summer. I mean, we heard it in a done in the wrong way when people were saying defund the police, but then we heard it in a better way where it was explained more, where they possibly want to take some of this money and retrain police, as well as have like crisis counselors to go out on certain calls instead of police or with police. Is this kind of like that? Sounds like similar stuff.
Let me give you an example. It was a couple years ago now, it was before the George Floyd episode. There was a Black man who was the caregiver to a adult with autism. And the adult with autism had some kind of public episode, and somebody phoned the police. So the man with autism, who was white, was sitting on the floor, pretty much just being passive at that point on the street. And the Black man, who was his caregiver, when the police arrived, the Black man laid on the floor, on the ground, I should say, on the street, on his back, with his arms over his head like this, saying, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me, don't shoot me." And guess what happened?
They shot him.
They shot him. He was laying flat on the ground, arms up like this, and the police shot him. He had nothing in his hands. But, the excesses of law enforcement, are terrifying. We all know this, utterly terrifying, that those who are supposed to be serving and protecting us are just wantedly killing people. The stories just are endless about law enforcement shooting people without cause.
Okay, look, I understand that. Okay, and then first, not all law enforcement is bad. They're not all looking to shoot us. So let's don't leave that impression out there. But again,
we should behave as if that's the case.
Well,
we should all behave.
Most of us do already, but not all of us. But now, again, specifically to what I'm asking, is that the type of where we would send out crisis counselors or something like that instead of law enforcement or along with law enforcement? Is that what you're talking about, to my question?
Right. That's right. So that was setting up to answer you. And so the idea is that when people talk about defunding the police, they're thinking about, why in the world did the police come in that context? Why wasn't it somebody who was trained as a mental health crisis, right? Officer. And so to some extent, you never know for sure. Law enforcement comes out because they have the infrastructure to get there fast. And they're armed just in case there really is a life-threatening circumstance. But often it's the case that it's just a mental health crisis where they could calm that person down if they had proper training. So again, one of the things that this petition seeks to do is to advance the level of training that law enforcement officers have with regards to mental health crises. Because once again, if we defund the police, we're going to have to fund a completely separate entity, and we're going to have to spread them out across the state. Because if there's a crisis, in Blanchard, or there's a crisis in Broken Arrow or whatever, you have to have somebody there quickly enough. So to fund the police, right, for mental health crisis makes sense given the infrastructure that we have, but it has to retrain them after decades and decades of this kind of militarization, this decades and decades of the law enforcement basically seeing us as that which is a threat to them. So there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems.
So
3%
hold
of
on.
$100
So is
million.
that going to train them to deal with people who use cannabis, or is that going to just retrain police to deal with people in general? It sounds more like it in general.
There's two separate funding lines, right? Among the 6 or 7 different line items, there's 2 separate funding lines that speak to the issue that we're discussing. One of them is retraining with respect to how to deal with cannabis, because the laws are all changed. Make sure they know the laws, right? That's one line of funding. The other line of funding is better training for mental health crises. And I'm not in any way saying that's sufficient. I'm not in any way saying that there isn't more needed. I think there is more needed. But those are just 2 line items that address the question you're asking.
Okay, we have
We need more.
a Trevor Chapman in the waiting room. I'm going to let him in and see what they've got to say. Here we go. Give them a minute to try and join. And there it is. Canna Creations, I see on the picture. So maybe this is somebody in the industry. We'll see in a second. So Lawrence, look, back to my original and addressing again Stephen Ross's question about helping people get back on their feet after a conviction. Can you be more specific on that?
Right. So, like I said, those are 2 of the line items that are already in there. But one thing that I really want to see, I actually had it in an early draft and it got pulled, but that doesn't mean it's not going back. Something that I really want to see is a line item that says something like, say, 5% goes towards certain types of funding, like job training and housing for individuals who have been adversely affected by the war on drugs, right? This is a war perpetrated by the government against its own people. And there's probably tens of millions of victims in this country. And tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of victims in this state. And so a redress is needed.
So do you think that, what'd you say? What is it in there now? Is it 3%?
No, that line item is not there at all. I'd like to add it. And I'd like to make it a significant percentage.
Well, now, wait, hold on. In the full access petition, don't you have some of the money going towards, I thought you did. Maybe I'm still thinking of an older draft.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that one yet. So in the full access, there's also a grant making program for persons who need expungement, right? So up to 3% of the total revenue will pay for means tested grants to pay the legal fees and the court costs for anybody who needs an expungement of a prior criminal charge. What I'm talking about, though, is, let's say you just get out of prison and you spent some of that prison time at least due to something related to, let's say, a prior cannabis charge. So let's say you spent 7 years in jail for A, B, and C, and they also found cannabis on you. That would make you eligible. Or you just spent time in jail for, let's say, home cultivation. That would make you eligible. And so you get out of jail, and this program would provide you with job training and housing. Or likewise, imagine this, somebody who's been out of jail for a few years and hasn't been able to get their lives back, right? They've served their time, but nobody will hire them because they have a criminal record. Well, develop a program in our state to help people who have these criminal records find jobs. That's the kind of thing that I would like to see added.
Okay, hold on just a second. Trevor, we haven't seen you yet. Can you hear us, or we can't hear or see you? You might need to swipe your screen to one side or the other and see if you can unmute yourself and turn your video on. All right, well, I'll give you a minute to try and figure that out. Try and turn on the video if you don't mind, and your audio. You might have to go out of the room and come back in if you can even hear me.
Yeah.
And here in a minute, if you don't get it, running, I'm going to put you back in the waiting room here in just a minute. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Linda Massey, let me sort of read her comments and see what I could say to respond. She says, how can I put this? I think it's a HIPAA issue and police have the right to get records. That's the first thing she says. And the next thing is, if they can't get proper training, patients need to be protected from the warrant to go after for cannabis for DUI. So the first issue, Linda, is yeah, there's an exception to your typical privacy rights. Law enforcement could potentially get a warrant to get data related to your cannabis purchases. When or why they would, I don't know. Maybe they think that you're diverting. Maybe let's say that they heard that you're buying 3 pounds of cannabis a week and they want to investigate what's going on. So there are circumstances where law enforcement could acquire those kinds of records, but those will probably be pretty rare, few and far between. The other part of it is having to do with the warrant to go after for cannabis for DUI. One thing there is that current law, which is horrible, current law is that if you have even a THC metabolite in your system, so you might have used cannabis 3 weeks ago, if you have a THC metabolite in your system, you're impaired. That's current law. It's called per se impairment. And so basically anybody out there who's a patient, it's illegal for them to drive by state law. So one of the things that this petition does is completely changes that, totally gets rid of it. So that it's not in no way whatsoever unlawful for a person to drive if they have a metabolite. And even if they have active THC doesn't mean you're impaired. And so it's really clear on this, that there is no presumption of impairment, even if you have active THC in your system. And law enforcement would be required to provide evidence based upon roadside testing, cognitive tests, behavioral tests, if they want to make the case for impairment. They would no longer be able to charge you with impairment solely based upon you're using cannabis, you're having a metabolite or active THC in your system.
I would like to add something. In reading her comment, I'm wondering if this isn't in some way related to some of the issues we've seen recently with people getting pulled over and law enforcement supposedly having their information. I'm hearing that one of the first things law enforcement is saying in small town Oklahoma anyway, one of the first things they're saying to people is, do you have your card on you? It's a trick question. We can't seem to confirm from any way we can check that they've gotten any of this information. And I think there'd be some pretty big lawsuits if anybody could confirm that. So they've just developed this trick question and they just walk up to your car. And one of the first things they say is, do you have your card on you? And us cannabis users are all ready to go, yeah, I've got it right here. Well, then the second you do that, boom, you're on their radar now and it's all over but the search. So I think that's just a trick that people are walking into, unfortunately. That's the conclusion I've come to, because again, we keep researching this, making calls to people at law enforcement and in the government, and nobody can confirm that this has happened. But then we repeatedly hear people saying this is happening. So again, the only way that would work out is if they just develop this question to walk up and ask right off the bat, do you have your card? So don't fall for the tricks. I think that's what's happening.
You know what people should do?
What's that?
With your OMA card, you should either have a Post-it that sits right on it or a little sleeve that you put it in that says, I do not answer questions without counsel present.
Yeah, so you remember that when you pull your card out. Okay, Amy's brought up eliminating THC from, well, that just, my screen just jumped. would you go over how you have the language on testing for THC for DUI? I think this will address her issue.
Yeah, so if you have a THC metabolite, that in no way whatsoever serves as evidence of impairment. So, no more does a THC metabolite serve as evidence of impairment as orange juice does, right? Completely irrelevant. The language for active THC is there is no presumption of impairment based upon active THC or the presence of marijuana. So the idea is that they can't presume that you're impaired. And so if they have any cause to think that you might be impaired, they have to then do something like a field sobriety test. And so let's say, for instance, you veer or swerve or whatever, you fail to signal, law enforcement pulls you over, right? And so then they ask you whether or not you have cannabis or whatever. You'd say, I don't answer questions without counsel present. And am I being detained or am I free to go? And then the officer says, I'd like to conduct a field sobriety test. So you get out of your vehicle, you follow the officer's instructions with regards to a field sobriety test. If you pass, you pass, they leave you, they let you go. If you don't pass, then it's possible, but still extremely unlikely, they may want to bring you in for a blood test. If you were involved in a car accident and they have suspicion of impairment, it's more likely they would bring you in for a blood test. That's the way it currently works, right? That's the way it currently works. And so let's say they were to bring you in for that blood test. Under the ORCA petition, if they find a THC metabolite completely irrelevant, if they find active THC, it pretty much has no bearing at all, except they could say, the officer could say, I have all these other reasons to think the person was under impairment from cannabis. And they also had active THC. So it could be a contributing factor, but it's not enough on its own to establish impairment. Now, the one thing that I would like to tweak still is I would like to see if there's a way we could shift the language to say, if you are a regular or frequent user, if you've developed a tolerance to THC, then active THC in your blood, again, has no evidentiary weight. So we've had some conversations about how to do that, and that still might get in there. We just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that sounds a little tricky, because then if you go to court, then have to prove you're a regular user? I'm not saying that'd be impossible to do. I'm just saying, do we want to walk into court and prove we smoke cannabis all day?
Well, but consider it this way. Let's say you were charged, right, with a DUI. You're charged with a DUI and you go to court and you want to fight the charge. And so the officer says, I think he was under the influence for reasons A, B, and C. C being that you have active THC in your system. And then I'd say, look, according to this statute that's now become law because of ORCA, I can't be construed as being under the influence of THC in virtue of active THC if I can prove to this court that I'm a regular cannabis user. So I can say, look, I've had my patient card now for 3 years. And so then the court says, well, we can't then consider the fact that you have active THC in your system as grounds for your being guilty. And then the question is whether or not the other evidence would be sufficient for your guilt.
Well,
So, this is the kind of thing we need to talk through. Let me just finish. This is the kind of thing we need to talk through with an attorney. And we have some attorneys who have dealt with cannabis DUIs in the past, looking over this language.
Okay, yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing or hearing more of these conversations about this particular issue. Because that seems a little concerning to me. Just the idea that I'm going to go into court and prove that I'm a regular user. Maybe it's just because of so many years of being afraid of that, to then have to go and prove that just counter to my being. You know what I'm saying?
I understand, but
It's
in this
counter to
case, it'll
everything
get you off the
that's me.
hook.
What?
In this case, though, it would get you off the hook.
I understand, but first thing I get past that part of actually proving the amount of cannabis I smoke. So that's
yeah, it's not a comfortable prospect. And you could always still just, plead no contest and accept the situation, or you could challenge, the charge on other grounds. There's lots of options, but this is the kind of thing that really concretely, you just need a trial lawyer, somebody who really knows the ins and the outs of how this plays out in a courtroom to give guidance on it. And we have somebody in the loop that we're in conversation with about that.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
All
so how
right.
this
Well,
plays out.
hold on. Sorry about that. All right. Another question we had. Oh, wait, let's get to one I just saw scroll through this here. Where'd it go? Well, I've lost the feed on my computer and I don't have the question on my phone. Some people had some questions on there and I've lost
Well,
them.
I
Can
could
you
see
pull it?
the
Can you
questions.
see them? I can't. My computer won't do the both Zoom and Facebook, so I lost them there, and I opened my phone too late to pick them up there.
Christy Winkler asks, is there a separate field sobriety test for marijuana? Yes, there is. That nystagmus, for instance, that is eye movement. There are various indicators that are used in the field to evaluate whether or not it's cannabis in particular. As well as that, there are computer devices that are calibrated to try to evaluate whether or not you're under the impairment of cannabis. Predictive Safety is one company that makes them, and then Druid is another company that makes them. And so those are used in a lot of businesses. I don't know if any law enforcement has adopted them.
Okay. All right, got my computer to open back up. What else? Have you seen any other questions yet?
Just we can sort of repeat, anybody who'd like to join us. Chris, you could explain how that's done.
The link's in the feed. If somebody wants to join us, you have to have the Zoom app downloaded. If you haven't, maybe that might be why that last person couldn't get in. I don't know. They couldn't get their video or their sound going, but it's in the feed. The link is, if any of you want to join in and ask a question or talk about it. Maybe some of you saw today and you might have a question or want to bring up something that came up today. One of the other questions I remember that came up today was about smoking in public. Somebody wanted to know if either one of these will change anything to do with whether or not where you can medicate. I think we went over that. It doesn't change any of that. It doesn't address any of that. So go ahead, Lawrence. Look like
So can I mention who it was that asked the question?
Yeah, it was Ronnie
Weschel, right? So many of us know Ronnie. Hi, Ronnie, if you're watching. And so Ronnie was wondering about what consequences this might have with regards to public consumption. And I think his concern might be that in a lot of rec states, public consumption is prohibited. So you're only allowed to consume on private property. And so Oklahoma is really a rarity with regards to both medical and any full access state. Almost every other state, be it medical or full access, does not allow any public consumption at all. Here in Oklahoma, you can walk down the street and smoke a joint, right? So here in Oklahoma, you can use cannabis in any context where you could smoke a cigarette, with the exception of smoking areas in bars and things like that. So basically, anywhere outside in public, you're allowed to consume cannabis here in Oklahoma. And so Ronnie was wondering whether or not this would change that. And maybe his worry is that if we do go rec, that our legislature would want to tighten up on this rule and not allow for public consumption if we have a rec program. And maybe that's a fair concern, that things might change. But the thing is, if you have a patient card, you should still be allowed to consume in accordance with current statute. So hypothetically, if this passes, maybe the legislature would say only people with patient cards will be allowed to consume walking down the street. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I had some really serious conversations at the Department of Health way back in 2018 over this issue. And, not all the same people are there, but there's a lot of really absolutely solid evidence to show that public consumption does not carry a risk of contact highs and so on. So I'm not too worried about that as a possibility. Interestingly enough, State Question 806 and 807 did tackle that issue. And what 806 and 807 did was it said the current fine here in Oklahoma for public consumption of tobacco is $100. And what 806 and 807 did was it cut it to $25 for cannabis. So it actually cut the potential fine for public consumption down by 75%. And so maybe that's something we should do as well. We should say that if there's going to be a fine for public consumption, if they're going to fine public consumption, then it shouldn't be any greater than $25, which means that's like what law enforcement officer is going to bother. Either that or we just let it be and just not bring it up, and then just expect that that the legislature is not going to touch it as well. So
I will say, look, to that about the legislator, I want to say this, and this addresses the petitions to some degree, because there's things in the petition that allow the legislators to make adjustments, like possibly raising the taxes on the full access petition. It has it at 15, but they could raise it to as high as 20, or as Lawrence said, lower it.
Or lower it.
But let's address that. Okay. The legislators didn't pass 788. In 2004, Connie Johnson tried to file as a sitting senator the first cannabis bill in Oklahoma. Since then, many people, our own friend Norma Sapp, have been working on this. She's been working on this for 30 years. So this state has refused at every corner to do anything about cannabis. It was not the legislators that got us 788. It was not the legislators that got us this program. It was not the legislators that put in no qualifying conditions or anything else at all. Not one word. And most of them probably didn't even vote for it. And according to everybody, all of you out there and us, they've not been friends to this industry since the beginning. So I'm concerned putting things in there that allows the legislators to make adjustments. That's why when we talk about the taxes, which I hope as these community meetings go on, we get into detail a little more. When we talk about the taxes, I say, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be 20, because you may make it 15, but if you give them the right to raise it to 20, looking at the fact that right now, half of them would repeal it if they could do it and survive politically, there's no doubt in my mind they'll raise it to 20. So we're going to end up with 20 plus standard sales tax, which is going to put us just right at the 30 threshold. So we're going to end up with a rec program that has 30% taxes, not making us attractive to people from out of state, which is what we need for it to be able for the state to make any money on this and for the program to succeed, I believe. What do you think?
So the lowest tax rate for rec in the nation is 10%. Massachusetts and Michigan are at 10%.
Okay, hold on. That's the excise tax, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not the total tax. Let's tell them what the total.
No, that's not the total tax. No.
Okay.
So their total tax is going to be, let's say, 20%, give or take. I don't know what their state sales tax is, but let's say their total tax is 20%. If we did go up to 20% for excise tax, and then our local and state taxes above it, it would be 30%. So I'm with you. I don't like the taxes to be that high. I think I don't think we should let the legislature move them up at all. I don't get the point that Jed has for that. So I personally would have wanted the rec tax to be the 7% that we have now, and then 0% for medical patients. That's my preference. But when it comes to the issue of whether or not our program would be attractive to people in other states, hell yeah, it would be, even at 30%. Of course it would be. There'd be people from Kansas and Texas coming here to buy cannabis,
Yeah.
even
Okay.
at that amount.
Okay, but that would be on the short side. That's thinking short-sighted. We need to be attractive long-term, meaning after the federal government changes, after Kansas changes, after Texas changes, we have to assume that we're in an open market in the country and it's legal everywhere. Where do we want to be sitting when that happens? That's what I'm thinking about. When that happens, I want us to have the lowest taxes. Like you just said, I think it'd be great if we could keep it at 7, and that's on the rec side, and then 0 for the patient side. And let me tell you another reason why I think it's necessary in making this attractive. For the state to make any money, which they're going to have to, okay, because not everybody here is a cannabis user. Some people are going to vote for this because the state's going to make money. So for the state to make money, we have to have some rec users beyond just what will come from out of state. Now, yes, we will get some of those from in-state, like the ones we've been fighting for, the ones who can't get the card for this reason or that reason, they don't want to get the card. But if we keep it low enough, then a lot of people may not get their cards renewed. People who don't purchase often, the renewal rate may come down some. The card number, people holding cards may come down some, but some of those people will be quite happy moving over to a full access program where they don't have to have the card for whatever reason that is, they choose not to have it, and still have lower taxes. They'd have then, if we did it this way, they'd have the taxes we have right now with the card. Does that make sense? Do you understand why I say this makes it attractive? And we need people to not get renewed. We need, if we want full access to be successful, and we want to have no taxes on the patients, we have to have a market, and the market has to pay some taxes. If they're lower, we'll get more people in that market. I just see it as basic economics.
So the higher the tax rate for full access, the better it is for our medical program in a certain sense, right?
Because the more people who that says that the goal of the medical program is just solely numbers.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Right. Like what I'm trying to do here is lay out all of the ups and downs, all the both sides of it, the political calculation. So the higher the tax for full access, the less attractive full access is going to be for people who can get a patient card. So the more people are going to keep their patient cards. So the numbers of people who will continue to keep their patient cards will be greater the higher the tax rate goes. The lower the tax rate goes, the more likely somebody won't bother renewing their card. And it's just a dollar amount. So right now, at that 15% versus 0%, if you consume more than $500 worth of cannabis a year, then you should just get your patient card. If you consume less than $500 of cannabis a year, then you should just pay the 15%. And so the people who will be spending less money at the dispensary will be paying the higher tax rate, which means that the total revenue would be less. And so then if we're hoping to make a lot of money out of this, if we're hoping to make a lot of money out of this for the state, then you're right that the higher excise tax may not be particularly advantageous unless you factor in visitors, which I think would be a big element to this for the next 2, 3, 4 years. So 2, 3, 4 years out, I think that we should expect $100 million or more out of that excise tax from visitors into the state. After that, then I think a recalculation of the whole tax structure would be appropriate. And the petition allows for that recalculation.
How does it allow for that recalculation? By raising it?
Or lowering it. It gives the legislature the option to go in either direction. But one thing that I would say, though, is I would like to add a line in there that says something like, should cannabis be legalized at the federal level, then our excise tax shall be no higher than the lowest tax rate among the states contiguous to our own.
That's better than than nothing, I guess. I just think
Right.
that it has to be, this does to some degree have to be about money, because as we were talking about a few minutes ago, we want 3% to go to retrain law enforcement and 3% to go to this and 3% to go to that. Well, there's not going to be a percent if the tax rate is so high that everybody just gets the card and we drop the taxes on the card.
Yep.
So
true.
it's, and
Right. And that's part of the whole calculation, because on the one hand, we don't want a 10% excise tax on tomatoes. Why should we have a 10% excise tax on cannabis, right? There's something offensive in a way about taxing it. It's like, yeah, we've been an oppressed population for the last 100 years. We're now going to let you use it, but we're going to basically force you to bend over and take our taxes for us to give you the liberty to do this thing.
it's a
Right?
sin tax.
That's just offensive.
Right. It's
Right,
a sin tax, just like alcohol.
Right. On the other hand, right, on the other hand, what we could say is that the higher the revenue that comes in from marijuana, the more political influence that the world of cannabis has in our state. So my preference would be this: a lower tax rate to start out with, the 7% excise tax for non-card holders. When federal law changes, then the excise tax goes away and gets replaced by a wholesale tax for the export of cannabis, so that inside of Oklahoma, you're not going to pay anything more. But when we export cannabis out of state, that's where the extra revenue is going to come.
Okay. That sounds like a pretty good idea. I wonder what everybody thinks of that. Guys, bounce that around a little bit and throw it back at us. Tell us what you think. I say, and obviously we agree to some degree anyway. I'm pretty sure we do. The 7% would be enough. And the 7%, I believe the math says the 7% will bring in the more money in the long run, especially after that, as you say, 2 to 3 year period before the states around us do something. Because if we come out with this high thing, you just said it, we're going to have to reevaluate this when the states around us do something. That's a bad position to put ourselves in. That really is not a good position to put ourselves in, where we have to reevaluate after Texas decides to do something. And I say again, like I said earlier, I don't ever think you're going to see them lower taxes on cannabis at the Capitol. Now, I know they're game for dropping the excise tax on card holders. Okay. If they could tweak the program they want to, I know they would be willing to drop the excise on card holders. But in a rec program, a rec petition, if this was to pass, I don't ever see them ever considering lowering the taxes, even if we get 3 years down the road and we decide, oh, we're now so much higher than Texas and Kansas that maybe we should lower it to bring in money. They won't do it. They won't, because they don't want it anyway.
Yeah. So I see that Jules Dewey likes this idea about the wholesale tax for interstate transport. So here's this, Jed and I talk regularly. Sometimes he agrees, sometimes he doesn't. If you guys support my idea, let him know as well. Go to the ORCA website and let him know that we need another line in the full access petition that says, should federal law change, then we're going to wipe away that excise tax and replace it with a wholesale or a general production tax or something like that, geared towards the export of cannabis and cannabis products. So,
Okay.
let me just put it in the petition to prepare the way.
Okay, let me ask you something else about where some of the money's going. I should probably remember all this by now, but I don't. So I'd like to see some money going to low-income housing or something like that. The goal here being to help people, as you addressed earlier, that get out of prison and things like that, but not just them, but everybody. Our whole state is having a housing crisis right now. If we're going to use cannabis money to solve the law enforcement issue, and we're going to use cannabis money to retrain law enforcement to deal with all issues, because that's what we're talking about doing. Yes, we'll have an emphasis on cannabis, but we're going to be paying as cannabis users to retrain law enforcement. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I also want to see money go to low income housing. So how do we get that in there? How do we, what would
So
it take to do
right.
that?
So just as a piece of context, when Colorado went full access, news stories started to come out about increasing homeless population. And the claim on the anti-cannabis side was, look what happens when you legalize weed. People can no longer keep down a job and get evicted and start living on the street, or all these, people hippies start coming into our state and just live out on the streets. So that's what the anti-cannabis folks were saying with respect to Colorado. But what was really going on was the revenues that were being generated by full access there, all the businesses setting up shop there, raised the property value so much that landlords that used to lease out their space, their homes to Section 8 housing, people that used to have multifamily houses and so forth, they evicted them, and then they upscaled them to sell the property. What would have been just a broken down old house that might have been worth $50,000 all of a sudden comes to be worth $500,000, because these neighborhoods are getting gentrified. 5 Points in Denver, for instance. And so we're seeing here in Oklahoma a little bit of that as well, right? The property values here in Oklahoma have increased 20-30%. That is, the residential property values have increased 20-30% in the last 2 years. Part of it is related to cannabis, a lot of other factors. And so that's putting economic hardship on individuals who then struggle to pay their rent. And the cannabis dollars can help do something about that. But as Chris points out, the lower the tax rate, the less revenue we get, the less we can help people. Because 3% of $100 million is only $3 million. That's not going to go that far at the level of the entire state.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to see a line in there that somehow addresses some money to low income housing. And again, not just because of that. Now, that's one of the reasons why I've wanted whatever petitions move forward for the last couple of years to have these issues in there, because I didn't want us to do like some of these other states and wait till the problem got bad and then sit around and whine about it, and then maybe down the road spend some money on it. Like, for example, in Oregon, they spent like $5 million on mini homes for the homeless. This was after, years and years and years of legal cannabis. I would like us to be doing things like that on the front side. So again, how do we do that on the front side of this? That's what I would like to see, at least in this full access petition. Some of that money, I think, needs to somehow help with the housing problem, which we all know is getting worse as the days go by, because the eviction freeze moratorium or whatever has passed just in the last few days.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we put that line in there? Do we need to be all messaging Jed about this, or?
It's a way to do it. He tells me that he's getting a lot of comments about A, B, or C, and he asked me to write up some language to address it. Or, he and I talk, and he said, here's some of the notes that I've gotten, let's go over them. So he and I tend to brainstorm once or twice a week about making changes. And so if a lot of people say we need to start allocating some of this revenue to deal with the homelessness, or to deal with some sort of compensation for people who have been negatively affected by the war on drugs, the more he hears about it, the more likely it is to happen. This is a community project. Community input is needed. And so, the petition that we have now, even though we only have a couple of weeks until we're ready to file it, all along, it's just been, this is kind of the platform for community input. There's been lots and lots of places already where the petition over the last 2 weeks, a month, has been modified based upon community input.
All right. Well, we have 14 people watching right now. I'm going to ask all 14 of you to send Jed or send ORCA a message that you'd like to see some of this money going towards helping with the low income housing problem in the state. We need to spend this money on the front side, not when the problem gets worse.
But bear in mind, bear in mind though, with this stuff, that this won't get on the ballot until 2022, either the summer or the fall of 2022. And the revenue won't start coming in, right, until after it passes. So if we can generate any revenue for the homeless population, it's going to be more than a year out.
Yeah, so we're looking at 2 or 3 years before we can really even do any good with it. So we definitely need it in there because, you know, if we don't start, then it never gets started. So that's certainly better than 4 or 5 years. So whatever it takes. All right, we are coming up on an hour. You got anything specific you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
You know, it's been a long day. This is our sort of second session of conversation. And I think just what I want to emphasize is that the plan is to have this filed in a couple weeks. And so anybody with ideas, please send them along sooner rather than later. Because once you send in your idea, then what we often have to do is we have to start working on language. We have to pass it by attorneys. And so it takes some time to process it and figure out how to properly set that into constitutional form. So sooner rather than later with your input, please.
Well, I want to give another shout out to Bison Rose for bringing the hot dogs today. Thank you for that. And they brought the good dogs, so that was good. And of course, the Moto and the Bunker for putting us all up, or putting up with all of us today. We put that both ways. We actually had a pretty good crowd. I was surprised. We had, like you said, about 30 people. Not everybody could stay the entire time, but you know, we did stretch it out. We went almost 3 hours. So
Yeah,
that was quite a long meeting. But I think we got a good start. Like you said, unfortunately, we're looking at a couple weeks before this could be filed. And I think we need a lot more input before then. So we'll continue to do this show at least a couple times a week, maybe more. I mean, if we can line up enough people to come on here and talk about it, if you guys want to come on here and talk about it, we'll do a show every night between now and when it's filed, if that's what it takes. The goal here being that none of us wake up the day after it's filed and get all mad and huffy puffy because we don't like what's in it. Now is the time to deal with that sort of stuff. Now is the time to get in there what you want in there. Like with me, I want to help with the low-income housing. This week, I will try and convince all of you to contact Jed about that. If there's something you want in there, contact us so we can help spread that word. And that's how we get this done. And hopefully within a couple of weeks, we can all come to some agreements. The goal being when this is over, we're all still sitting together. And that could be testy. I know there was even some testy tempers today, but it all worked out. So that's about it for now, I guess. So, all right, everybody, let us know what you think, and we'll keep doing this. Until next time, stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road.
bye.